Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 2023 edition of EPIC Insight. This is Joe Corona. I'm a sales consultant covering the Northeast and the Ohio Valley at EPIC Retirement Plan Services, and I'll be the host for today's call. What is retirement? How do you define this crucial phase of your post-career life? And how can you help your clients better prepare for retirement? Understanding this phase of life and discovering new ways of viewing it are more important today than ever before. With that in mind, we're pleased to have our partners and colleagues at Hartford Funds joining us for an exciting presentation to help arm you with these valuable tools. In a moment, I'll hand over the mic to Julia Dempsey of Hartford Funds to say a few words and introduce our presenter for today's session, John Diehl. Your line will be muted throughout the call, but if you have any questions you would like addressed at the end of the session, please enter them in the webinar control panel and we will address them at the end of today's session. With that, I will turn it over to Julia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Joe, for the introduction. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Julia Dempsey, and I'm the Institutional Investment Consultant for Hartford Funds, covering EPIC Retirement and Wealth Services. So first and foremost, thank you all for your time today and for your business and support of Hartford Funds. We sincerely appreciate all of the support and all of the assets. At Hartford Funds, in addition to the investment solutions we provide that many of you are familiar with, that are managed both in-house at Hartford Funds and through our investment partners at Wellington and Schroders, we're also really constantly focused on the evolution of our industry, specifically as it pertains to planning for retirement. But we're very cognizant of the need for firms like ourselves to go above and beyond just the product alone. And so this is why we really highly value our partnership with the MIT Age Lab, who we've partnered with for over a decade now. And you can see the MIT Age Lab logo on the screen. And John Diehl is going to talk a little bit more about the Age Lab. So again, my colleague John today is presenting our module that's titled 8,000 Days of Retirement. It's personally one of my favorites, but I do want to mention that we have several other modules and research pieces that are extremely beneficial to your practices and your clients. So if you're interested in learning and hearing about some of those, please feel free to reach out to myself or anyone at Hartford Funds, or to browse our website, hartfordfunds.com, to see more information and more of our content with the MIT Age Lab. My colleague John Diehl and our presenter today is our Senior Vice President and Managing Director of our Applied Insights team at Hartford Funds. And so in that role, he oversees our relationship with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. John and his team frequently work and interact directly with Joe Coughlin, who's the founder of the MIT Age Lab, and Joe's entire team at the Age Lab. John Diehl and his team frequently work with financial professionals like yourselves all over the country to essentially help them differentiate their practices and help them develop deep and long-lasting relationships with their clients. John has been with the Hartford and Hartford Funds for over 30 years now. He holds the CFP, CHFC, and CLU designations. And on a regular basis, he travels all over the country speaking to financial professionals and presenting at industry conferences. You may recognize his name as he's been quoted in several consumer and trade publications like the Wall Street Journal and Financial Planning and On Wall Street. And he's also been a guest on CNBC and Bloomberg Television. So we're very grateful to have John and his team and their relationship with the MIT Age Lab and our partnership with the MIT Age Lab at Hartford Funds. And we're really excited for you all to hear what John is working on with the Age Lab and the way it can help your clients. So I will now pass it over to John. But again, my name is Julia Dempsey, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Julia, thank you very much, and thanks, Joe, for the introduction and opportunity as well. And lastly, for all of you joining us today, thanks for taking the time. So as Julie said, my name's John Diehl. I've been with Hartford Funds almost 35 years now, but the last 20 years of my career have been spent studying changing consumer demographics, the impact of technology on lifestyle, and how those changes are going to shape the expectations of future clients, future employers, future plan sponsors, and yes, future plan participants. And today's presentation, 8,000 Days, I would tell you, is one of the more popular presentations that we give to retirement plan clients and plan participants. Because just over the past week or two, I was reading some research that was talking about increasing financial literacy among employee groups. And key to that increase in financial literacy is helping people understand and think about longevity planning issues, right? What good is the retirement plan, if you will, if we can't even envision how we're going to use it in the future? Because understanding what we'll be using that money to do is a big motivator towards trying to save, especially earlier in our careers, where we may just not see the immediate need. And so that's where today's presentation comes in. The title of the presentation, 8,000 Days, is based on MIT's view of what retirement looks like, or let's scrap the word for retirement for a moment, an entire phase of our life that we'll talk about in a moment. So I'll talk about today really three things. I'll talk about what 8,000 days really is through the lens of the researchers at MIT. We'll talk about what we call the 4 stages of retirement. And essentially those 4 phases or 4 stages, most of us will experience at least 3, if not all 4 of those individual stages of retirement. And then we'll talk a little bit about, so what difference does this make in terms of how participants may begin to think about this and enact it in their plans and implement it. But before we go there, let me talk a little bit about the MIT Age Lab Julia introduced you to a moment ago. So the Age Lab is made up of about 40 researchers. They're not all engineers. They are located on MIT's main campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just across the river, the Charles River from downtown Boston. But they're not all engineers. These 40 researchers are comprised of psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, physiologists. I always say a whole team of ologists, all studying that third bullet point. Changing demographics, the impact of technology on our lifestyle. And what they do is they work with many industries and companies, not just in the United States, but around the world, thinking about how those changing demographics and technology are going to impact consumer demand for product design, environments that we may find ourselves in, or new services that may need to be developed. So I would tell you, maybe one of the best things about working with the Age Lab is that they're not focused solely on financial services. In fact, I probably learn more about retirement services by talking to consumer companies, healthcare companies, and the like, who are associated with MIT. So as an example, if you're viewing the slides today, you'll see on the slide a picture of a Volkswagen Beetle. It's the world's only $3 million Volkswagen Bug, because inside of that car are all kinds of technologies meant to measure driver acceptance of new technology in the automobile. That's from retinal scanners that will track your eyesight, where you're looking, all the way to instrumentation on the steering wheel that can measure the perspiration that you generate under stress in a stressful situation in the car. You may say to yourself, what in the world is that all about? Well, my guess is that some of you today drive an automobile that's equipped with technology such as lane departure warning systems or reverse monitoring systems, smart headlights, automatic braking, and the like. What you may not realize is that many of those technologies were developed with the aging driver in mind. You see, as we age, muscles atrophy, reflexes slow, even neck rotation becomes more limited. And I don't know about all of you, but I can't tell you how many times the technology in my car has saved me when I'm backing out of a parking spot and I can't see from what direction cars are coming from because I'm blocked from the cars next to me, right? That's just one example. Again, decreased neck rotation among aging drivers. This technology, by the way, has had a dramatic impact on lessening accident rates among aging drivers in the United States. I would just share with you, the automotive industry is one of MITH Lab's top clients, thinking about future design changes and technology all the way through the autonomous vehicle, but certainly all the assistive technologies that we find in the automobile today and its impact upon an aging demographic in the United States. You'll notice leaning up against that Volkswagen Bug are two researchers dressed in funny looking suits. What they're wearing is an aging suit. The name of the suit is called Agnes. Agnes, everything in MIT is an acronym. It stands for Age, Gain, Now, Empathy System. I could take any of you listening today to the call, regardless of your age. We could dress you in the Agnes suit and we could calibrate what it would feel like to be somewhere between 80 and 85 years old in terms of restricted movements in the limbs and your arms and legs. Under that vest are a set of chest weights and weights all over the body to simulate fatigue. You'll see they have funny looking Crocs on their feet. Those Crocs are designed to actually kind of make it feel like you're dealing with neuropathy in your feet, which may change your gait. The goggles for impaired vision, there's several different types of goggles to simulate different visual conditions. So I think you're getting the idea here. I know some of you may be thinking, who in their right mind would want to wear a suit like this? Well, think for a moment. What if you were the CEO or senior management team of a large American retailer and you were concerned about whether your stores were laid out in a manner that would accommodate an aging US population? CVS Health, for those of you that are familiar with CVS stores, was one of the companies that thought exactly that and engaged the MITH Lab to bring in the Agnes suit, dress their senior executives in it, and go shopping in your own stores. So as you go to reach for the very high volume item that's always on the very top shelf, but you can't quite get there, or maybe there are visual differences in flooring which make transitions hard to see, all of a sudden ideas may start to pop into your head as you experience what an older American may experience in shopping in your own stores, because if they're not comfortable, chances are that they may not frequent your store again in the future. The next time you go to visit a CVS pharmacy, take a look around. You're going to see some visual changes, environmental changes coming to the store. One of the things you'll notice is that shelf heights will be lowered, right? CVS knows that women are responsible for about 90% of all out-of-pocket home health care expenditures. And for the ladies who are listening on the call, bad news, as you age, you're liable to lose an inch or two of stature. Good news, although you can't see me today on the call, I only stand in height at 5'3" tall. Therefore, I totally understand. If you have to climb the shelves to knock things off the top shelf, chances are you may not go back. Shelf heights will be lowered. Those big long aisles of products, they won't be aisles any longer. They'll be broken into islands, which can be navigated more easily when mobility limitations begin to come into the picture. If any of you on the call today subscribe to Disney Plus, there's an added bonus here, and that is that recently the National Geographic Channel published a series on longevity called Limitless. Limitless was the name of the series. It stars Chris Hemsworth, the guy that plays Thor in all of those Marvel movies. Well, the MITH Lab actually specially designed a version of the Agnes suit, and they dressed Chris Hemsworth in the Agnes suit for the 6th and final episode of that series, Limitless. So if you're curious as to what this thing is, and you have Disney Plus, you could search Limitless, look for episode 6, and you'll get to see Agnes in action. So, oh, by the way, one other note, probably the oldest ever attendee of one of my workshops was a 104-year-old woman. And when I said, we've got this suit that it can simulate what it feels like to be 80, 85 years old, she raised her hand and said, Mr. Diehl, where do I sign up? I have to caution you, it doesn't go in that direction. It's one way only. It makes us feel older. I don't think it'll work to make us feel younger. So folks, I just shared a couple of those things with you to help you understand that the research going on at MIT has practical implications for products, services, maybe even environments that we may find ourselves in a future year. But hey, we're here to talk about retirement and plan participants and how are they supposed to think about their future. Well, this is Dr. Joe Coughlin, Joe is the founder and current director of the MIT Age Lab, and he puts our problem this way. He says we have a longevity paradox. We've finally achieved what we've been trying to achieve since we walked, which is living longer, but here's the challenge. We don't really know what to do with all that additional time. We're going to talk about that. My hope today is that as we cover the segments, which I mentioned to you today, about 8,000 days, what does that stand for? And these 4 phases of retirement and how that helps us prepare, I hope that I can give you somewhat of a framework to think about some of the stages of life that we'll be passing through and how to begin to analyze or think about what stage I'm in, maybe what stage my parents or grandparents are in for those plan participants who are younger, how to anticipate certain needs in my role in that, whether I'm a person who is aging myself or maybe someone in my family is aging. It all has tangible impact on how we plan for our future. So with that said, let me explain what we mean by 8,000 days. So the researchers at MIT tell us that today in the United States, your life can roughly be divided into 4 8,000-day segments. It's about 8,000 days from the day you're born till the day you graduate from college, university, get into the armed services or exit the armed services, begin that career. It's about 8,000 days. Be another 8,000 days from graduation, if you will, to your first midlife crisis. And I say first midlife crisis, we're living longer. Maybe you'll have an opportunity for multiple midlife crises, but about 8,000 days between graduation and midlife crisis. Another 8,000 days between midlife crisis and retirement. And then on average, about 8,000 days from retirement to expirement, although I think we'll all agree, none of us really know how long or short that last segment will be. But as we think about these stages, what MIT tells us is that the script for the first 3 segments has already been written. So we know in the first phase, you're supposed to go to school, get good grades so you can get into the career, the university of your choice. Maybe you learn that trade that's going to set you off in the direction of your own business, whatever that is. But as we're learning, we also have mentors along the way. We often have parents, certainly, and maybe teachers that help guide us along that way. And then we get into the second phase, the growing phase. Now, in that segment, the reason we call it the growing phase is everything seems to be growing. Your income is growing because your job skills are likely growing. Your family may be growing at this point. And by the way, you'll also have mentors there. Your parents may be involved. You'll have bosses, perhaps teachers still involved in that phase, all until you get to that point, usually in your mid to later 40s, early 50s, where you turn around and look at that spouse or significant other that you haven't spoken to for like 20 years because you've been running to the little league fields, dance recitals, soccer games, you name it. And you start to think, what is life going to look like when it changes, when the kids leave home, when I get tired of doing what I'm going to be doing? We start to envision what that looks like, but we don't exit the workforce at that point. In fact, we'll stick around about another 8,000 days. By the way, if you're wondering how long 8,000 days is, if you've done the math in your head or maybe on the back of a napkin, 8,000 days is just shy of 22 years. So you're looking at ages 22, 44, 66, and 88 years old, roughly speaking. But then we get to that last segment, and here's where the challenge is. In the last segment, the script hasn't been written yet. You know, most of us base our ideas on what retirement will look like for us based on what we've observed from our parents and grandparents in previous generations. Here's the danger in that. Our retirement looks quite a bit different than it did just a generation or two, merely from the extent of how long we may be living and how well we may be living. Therefore, who do we look to guide us? We're kind of writing this story as it goes. So to point this out, you may know of, maybe in your own families or maybe in your communities, people like the folks who are on my screen here. Now, I have bad news. Lucille Randone, if any of you picked it up in the news, just passed away last week. She was, at the time, the world's oldest living person. She's been replaced by a woman who is US born, currently living in Spain, who is a spry 115 years old. So I may not have to change my slide for another couple of years, given her relative youth. Next to her, Catherine Switzer, 5 years ago, was celebrated for finishing the Boston Marathon at age 70. Now, you may be thinking, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but there are a lot of people age 70 who finished the Boston Marathon. Yes, but the significance was that Catherine Switzer was the first woman to ever complete the Boston Marathon, and 5 years ago was the 50th anniversary of her first running. She ran it again 50 years later after initially completing it. Now, I always say I don't want to spoil the story, but I already kind of did because I told you she finished that first marathon. But if you want to see some interesting history, Google Catherine Switzer and look to see what happened when the head of the Boston Athletic Association discovered that a woman was running for the first time in his marathon. I won't spoil this part. I'll just tell you he did show up somewhere between miles 13 and 15 to physically remove her from the course. But I'll leave the rest a mystery. But as I said, she did finish the race. Down below on the left side, Jean Calment, 122 years old, is the oldest lived person in world history with documentation. She lived to 122 years old. The bad news is she might have lived to 128, but she only stopped smoking at 118. True story. And lastly, my favorite on the whole page, Julia Hurricane Hawkins, the current world record holder in the over age 100 category for the 100-meter dash. Julia was not happy with her time the last time she broke the record in the 100-meter dash, thought she could do better, expects to come back this year to again try to break her own record. Folks, it's not only about living longer, it's also about living better. And that's what this new period of extended longevity gives us. One thing that we want people to understand is that if we're looking at longevity trends in the United States today, if I have two people, husband and wife, married, both age 65, there's now a 50-50 chance that one of the two, and ladies probably aren't surprised at who the odds are in favor of, a 50-50 chance that one of the two will live to age 92 years old. You think about someone that targets retirement in their mid-50s, early 60s, even later 60s, you're talking 15, 20, 25, 30 years in retirement. In fact, now we're engaging people who may be quote unquote retired for longer than they've actually worked. Because of that length of longevity and because of the health that many of us will enjoy, the traditional retirement story that is kind of baked into our minds about a couple of bike rides on the beach, save up for that big trip around the world, maybe squeeze in a few rounds of golf in between, is dramatically changing, right? Even though that may be some of the higher points we think of, today's retirement, the new retirement story looks something more like this. Where are we going to live? Am I going to work? Is my spouse or significant other going to work? What hobbies have I not gotten to explore yet? Do I want to go back to school? Right? So on and so forth. So all these things now are available to us mainly because of the length of our life, but also the quality of our life that we can see ourselves living moving forward. Which brings us to the second section, our second topic, which is what MIT calls the 4 phases of retirement. Now, as I said, these 4 phases, many of us will experience all 4 phases. Some of us may experience 3 of the 4, but most of us will hit at least 3 of the 4. Now, the trick here in these 4 phases, I want to warn you up front, is they're not determined by chronological age. A lot of times I'll have people say, well, at roughly what age does, the transition from phase 1 to phase 2 happen? Folks, lifespan is measured by chronological age. Aging oftentimes is not. Aging is a function of 3 primary resources that we have available to us. One is your physical resource. How's your health? Do you have the health to be able to pursue and do the things that you had hoped to do in that future stage of life? Second, your financial resources. Do you have the money to be able to do the things that you hope to do? Whether that's starting a business, moving across the country, being the world's greatest grandparent, whatever it is, finances are an important part of this picture, especially since we're living longer. And the third and most frequently overlooked resource is that of your social resource. How connected are you? How wide and deep is your friendship network? You know, MIT tells us that your friends, the number of your friends and the depth of your relationships are one of the best indicators of healthy aging. Your friends do two really important things for you as you age. They'll get you up off the couch, physically moving, giving you a place to go and a reason to be there. And secondly, mental stimulation, a reason to circle the date on the calendar, things to look forward to, mountains to climb, challenges to overcome, opportunities to explore, so on and so forth. So as we think about our friendships, I do have to warn you, there is what MIT calls an epidemic that was around prior to COVID-19. And the epidemic, at least initially, is centered in the male population. Ladies, you're not off the hook here, but what is this epidemic? It's largely based on extended longevity, and the epidemic is one of boredom, loneliness, and depression. Why is that? Well, especially for men, the work environment seems to be the place outside of their most immediate significant other spousal relationship where men gain the most socialization. When men decide to retire, oftentimes they leave that entire social network behind and they find it more difficult to form new friendships. I mentioned ladies, you're not off the hook, but why not as severe for women? Well, the theory is that women, despite the increasing importance of women in the workforce over the last 60 or 70 years, despite that, women have still retained in many situations the title of chief operating officer of the household. It's women by 2 to 1, regardless of what generation you look to, who usually take the lead in planning social activities, dinners out with friends, birthday celebrations, holiday celebrations, and the like. And so, what we observe is that women tend to rebuild social networks around family, hobbies, and entertainment much more quickly than men do. So, in this final phase of retirement, we urge men, but we really urge everyone to be thinking about where are the places where I will interact and be able to maintain a social network that will be important to me as I age. So, folks, 3 resources: physical, financial, and social. So, with that, let's touch on the 4 phases of retirement. I'm just going to touch on each one and explain their significance and talk a little bit about what's changing. So, the 4 phases are the honeymoon phase, the big decision phase, what we call navigating longevity, and then lastly, the solo journey phase. So as we look at these phases, let's start with the honeymoon phase because it's the easiest one for people to understand. The honeymoon phase is the one that people typically think of when we think of retirement. It's that phase where we get control of our calendar back. We get to spend more time on the things that we had hoped to do with the people that we want to do that with. But I'll share with all of you that the number one thing that's changing about the honeymoon phase is the role of work. But John, you just said we're talking about retirement here, 4 phases of retirement. Yes, but retirement is changing. When we ask people in just about every consumer survey I've seen at MIT, what do you envision doing when you leave your primary place of employment? We don't use the R word because we didn't want to bias the kind of the result. What people will answer, usually in the top 3, is I envision working in some form. Now, not working like the first 20 or 30 years of my career. It might be working part-time. It may be working at a small business. It may be consulting back to my own company, maybe that I retired from. It may be working for a cause I believe in, leveraging my skills and knowledge that I've accumulated over my career, which we might also call volunteering. But I want to work to stay engaged. It's not just about the money. As I mentioned before, work is a very big piece of socialization. And what we found was even prior to the pandemic, technology was making working as we age that much easier. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term the gig economy. The gig economy is where we don't have employers and employees, we have companies and contractors. One example would be Uber. You know, Uber says we're not a transportation company, we're a software company that matches someone that has a skill or an asset. In this case, someone has a car and knows how to drive it. We match them with someone that needs a ride. They made it agreed upon price, a trade is executed. May not realize that just prior to the pandemic, about 25% of Uber's drivers were over age 50. They got the highest ratings on the system. And when you asked in that age segment why they continued to work or drive for Uber, money was number 3. Number 1 was flexibility, the ability to turn it on, turn it off. If I wanted to turn it off right now, skip until next week, I could, right? It was totally on me. By the way, we see larger job trends moving in this direction too. If we want to retain talent, we better come up with new ways to make work flexible for people to have it fit their personal schedules as well, because that's how we'll be able to appeal to those talented people in the workforce, right? The second reason they said was if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be sitting around doing nothing. I don't drive on weekends when kids are out at bars. I drive business people back and forth to their jobs, airports, so on and so forth. And thirdly, hey, the money isn't bad either. And as you see on my graph, the gig economy was most popular in the older age worker segment because of all those things I mentioned, the flexibility, the ability to do things on my own terms. And folks, what we discovered over the past couple of years during the COVID pandemic was now, depending on my profession, I may be able to do some part, a significant part, or all of my job remotely. Well, as it turns out, if that's the case, I actually kind of like what I do. Now I have the flexibility to do it from anywhere in the United States where I can find a plug and a Wi-Fi signal. And so embracing remote work, giving me, again, added flexibility, has only made things better for aging workers. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we have a labor shortage in the United States right now. And that labor shortage is particularly acute in areas of skilled workers. So again, how will we retain talent in the future? It may be by making remote work and allowing people to work, maybe designing work, not 60 hours a week, maybe 20 hours a week with flexibility built in there, project work and the like. So topic for another call, but the role of work is changing retirement. As I mentioned earlier, reasons for working in retirement: want to stay active and involved, I enjoy working, and hey, the money isn't bad either. The other thing about the honeymoon phase, changing topics, is that when it starts, you'll likely be providing more financial support for your adult children than you do for your aging parents. But I don't want you to be misled here, right? As you think about getting the kids off the payroll because they get out of school or they start their own business and they're standing on their own 2 feet, about that time, you may realize that mom and dad start needing a little bit more help. The reason we bring this up in the context of retirement planning is one of the most important things we need to think about is, what would my role be in my family or in my community? Would I ever be called on to provide care for another? Will I need care myself? And who in my family or in my friendship circle may be able to help me with that care? One of the top reasons we see for retirement plans being upended, and by the way, not that people regret that this happens. What we hear all the time is retirement's a lot different than what I envisioned. About 2 years in, mom fell, broke a hip, we became full-time caregivers. We are so thankful that we were able to help her the way that we did, but it certainly changed what we were envisioning. So again, we're trying to move that decision point, if you will, away from the moment of crisis and have people think a little bit about, what role might I play when it comes to caregiving? And lastly, this is probably something I don't need to explain to all of you on the phone as advisors, but in this honeymoon phase of retirement is where the rubber hits the road. If you've been working with plan participants, you've helped project a little bit about, how much income will that 401k plan actually generate? What are their other assets? How much income's coming in? What might they expect in terms of their expenses in retirement? Will they spend more on travel but less on work clothes, so on and so forth? All of those are projections until we get to the honeymoon phase. And then the projection becomes reality. Sadly, for many Americans who've never talked to a financial advisor, they have misperceptions about what that income expense picture looks like. In fact, I put up on the screen here, these are statistics that come from the Employee Benefit Research Institute. They come out every year. They hardly ever change. About 60% of workers expect to receive a traditional defined benefit pension plan in retirement, pension benefit in retirement. sad news, only 40% say they ever worked for a company that offered a traditional defined benefit pension plan, right? So you want to talk about misplaced expectations. Yeah, they're there, which is why when we speak with plan participants, we want to make sure that they're taking accurate stock of planned income and planned expenses as they make that transition into retirement. So that's the first phase, the honeymoon phase. The second phase, what we call the big decision phase. And folks, here I'm going to share with you 4 questions that MIT says are crucial to predicting your future quality of life. They would say these are 4 questions that anyone age 45 or older ought to be asking yourself on a fairly regular basis. If not about yourself, then about someone that you care about. And I'm going to warn you before I share these questions with you that the questions themselves are going to underwhelm you given their simplicity coming from the rocket scientists at MIT, but there's a method to their madness. And so hang with me, I'll share the questions with you, but during the big decision phase, this is usually signposted by when people start having the conversation about maybe it is time to start cutting back from work because we've got some big decisions to make. So here are those 3 questions that MIT says are predictive of your future quality of life. They are, who's going to change your light bulbs? How will I get an ice cream cone? And who will I have lunch with? Let me explain what I'm talking about here because some of you are probably thinking, what in the world is he talking about? Who's going to change your light bulbs? About 90%, that's 90% of Americans state that they intend to age in their own homes. But in order for that to happen, not just keeping us in our homes to our early 70s, but our 80s, 90s, or beyond, we need to think about A, will our home even be able to accommodate us as we age? B, if it can, what modifications or services may be required in order to make that possible? MIT says that people now in the United States over age 50 may likely move as many times after age 50 as they moved prior to age 50. When I say this, plan participants are always like, I am never moving again, right? It's such a hassle. But what we find is as we enter retirement, we may upsize, we may downsize. We may want to move closer to children, or let's be honest, grandchildren. We may want to move away from children and grandchildren. We may need to live with children and grandchildren, right? And if I were to ask you, we may need the care of a care community at some point. Some of you may know the average age entry in the United States into independent living communities today. You may be familiar, independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing. Average age entry into independent living is 83 years old. We're staying in our homes as long as we can, but at some point that may not be tenable any longer. It may not be practical, it may not be safe. And so as we think about this retirement money that we're saving for, that money may actually help define where we're going to be able to live and hopefully live in a house that can accommodate us in an area or region that allows us access to the things that are most important to us, which gets us to the second question. How will I get an ice cream cone? Which is all about access. If you think about the small things on a daily basis that make life worth living, let me put it this way. Regardless of your age, we all know what it feels like now because of what we experienced the last 2 or 3 years. We know what it feels like to be isolated from family, friends, activities, and organizations that make life worth living. Well, sometimes it's not caused by a pandemic. As we age, the risk is that it's self-inflicted. We lose the ability to access things in many cases because at some point you may lose your ability to drive. This is one of the downsides of longevity. As we live longer, we may experience a period where we're not able to drive. And if we're not able to drive, how will we access things that are important to us? The answer to this question is twofold. One is the community you intend to age in and how accessible are the people and the things that you like to do. And secondly, it's your use of technology. So I'll just share with you quickly. Uber would share with us, the latest research I saw said that only about 13% of Americans over age 65 have ever taken a ride in an Uber or a Lyft ride sharing service, even though those companies would say that's a segment of the population that may benefit the most. As you think about why, I'll use my mom as a case study. A couple of years ago, I said, Mom, got a great idea. Why don't you download this Uber app? And the first thing we're going to do is load all of your personal credit card information into it. And then what that's going to allow you to do is to get in a car with a guy you don't know to drive to a place where you have no idea where you're going. Guess what she said? No thanks. Until I got in the car with her, I showed her how it worked. We talked to the driver. My mom, now at 83 years old, is now the cool kid the cool kid on the block who calls her girlfriend. She doesn't go by herself. If there's something social going on in the evening, she'll say, "Hey, hang tight. I'm going to dial up an Uber. I'll come get you, and we'll go have our fun." It can be liberating. So this question is about access and involves where you'll be living and your use of technology. And I think I covered it already, but who will I have lunch with is all about where will you find yourself in activities and routines that will expose you to new people and new relationships, oftentimes with younger people. Here's one of the big keys: integrate younger people into your social network, because by doing so, you'll virtually guarantee that you won't outlive your social network. You say, well, I guess it'd be good to be the last man standing. Not really. Not if you've ever met someone that's ever lost all those around them that make life worth living. So who I have lunch with, thinking about the activities, routines that will bring us into contact with other people. 3 big decisions in the big decision phase. Folks, that'll eventually give way to what we call the navigating longevity phase. And this is really signaled when someone in the family needs a significant dose of caregiving. Interesting, what we see in the retirement industry is that what concerns people the most up until age 65 is the money, the money, the money. How much is it going to take? How long will it last? How much am I going to be spending? So on and so forth. Look what happens after age 65. All of a sudden, healthcare begins to supplement or take precedence over money. What good's all the money if I don't have the health to enjoy it? And then over age 75, not only health, but specifically cognitive health, and then money to follow up. So again, being able to enjoy this time of life health is key to all components of that. When we think about caregiving, I asked earlier in the presentation that we challenge folks to think about the roles that they may play in their own families. Most caregivers don't even identify themselves as caregivers. By the way, the average caregiver is a 62-year-old female. Typical range is usually in the 50 to 65-year-old range, not by a lot though. We look at that segment, and there are a lot of men who are also providing care. They don't think about it though, because what starts as a couple of calls home to check in on mom and dad starts to turn into maybe making some fixes around the house while we're there, or maybe attending doctor's appointments to make sure we're all on the same page, managing medications, providing transportation. It may actually develop into helping to pay bills, helping to shop and prepare meals, and the like. Caregiving is not an easy job, and it oftentimes goes beyond just making sure mom and dad are taking their medications correctly. It can be tree falls in the yard, and sometimes it's not just mom and dad. It could be brother or sister, it could be a good friend. But let's say it's someone that lives in a different state or a good distance away from you. Tree falls in the front yard. Who's going to take care of helping to find someone to clear that out? These are the extended roles of the caregiver. It's extremely stressful and extremely important that we think about and prepare for that phase of caregiving should someone in our family, or should we, need that care in time. And folks, lastly, it gives way to what we call the solo journey phase, the phase no one likes to think about, but the researchers at MIT tell us that aging is not always a team sport. The fact is that at some point in this age of longevity, we may wind up doing it by ourselves. So here's a slide that often surprises people. They look at it, and the one stat that stands out is that the average age of widowhood in the United States is about 59 years old. Now you say, wow, that seems awfully young. Well, men tend to marry younger. If they marry a second or subsequent time, they happen to marry quite a bit younger. We overlay that with the mortality tables, and all of a sudden you'll see it. Oftentimes, if I'm speaking in a group of 50 people or so, never fails, usually 2 people, often women, I would guess in their mid to later 50s, will come up and say, I can't believe you just said that. Let me tell you my story. You may be familiar with it, but this topic of gray divorce, fastest growing segment of divorce in the United States, occurring to people age 50 plus. Number one, oh, by the way, the initiator of the majority of those divorces is the woman. And one of the top reasons she gives, she's bored. You don't want to go anywhere anymore, don't want to do anything. You know, it's funny, oftentimes when I present, it'll be at a conference, it'll be a break after my session. I'll walk out in the lobby and all the guys are on their phones going, honey, what are we doing this weekend? I know we're so busy. No, I'm just joking. But what I'm not joking about is we do have to make preparations for if we're part of a couple or if we're not. What does aging alone mean? What services may be needed? What impact will it have on where we live, what we do, so on and so forth? But folks, I can't live. Oh, by the way, the solo journey, important thing to understand, when it happens, it may actually throw us back into one of the other three phases. For instance, I may have to make a decision about whether I want to go back to work or whether I have to go back to work. I may have to decide, do I want to stay in the house that I'm in, or do I want to move to be closer to family or friends? If my spouse or significant other was my primary caregiver, but they're not here anymore, well, I need to supplement my care with paid services or contributions from my social network in some way. But folks, I can't leave you this afternoon in the dumps, so I'm going to share with you my favorite slide in the whole presentation. It's called The Age We Peak at Everything. So let me explain how this works. I have a chart that has numbers on it. They correspond to different ages, and I have kind of milestones marked on there. So for example, let's say you're a little bit worried about yourself because you can't remember names anymore. As long as you're over age 22, no worries, perfectly normal. We peak at remembering names at age 22. But you say, I can't even remember faces anymore. That's okay. That's age 32. If you're on the call today like me and you're over age 40, bad news, we probably missed the opportunity to make our Nobel Prize winning discovery. But folks, there's one main reason I put this slide up for you today, and that is there's one data point that repeats twice on my graph. It's life satisfaction. Life satisfaction peaks the first time at age 23. Do you remember age 23? You had no obligations. You probably had no money. You had lots of time. You had your health. Set your sails. Off you go. Life's an adventure. Screw it up today. It's okay. You can start it all over again tomorrow. It's one of the happiest times of our life. If you were wondering about lowest points of life satisfaction, usually in your mid 40s to early 50s. Why? It's because when you're under the crush of obligation, everybody wants a piece of you. You're trying to figure out how to get those kids up and out and on their own 2 feet. At the same time, work needs you 10 times more than they ever needed you during your life, during your prior career. Well, folks, good news, in your early 50s, that actually starts to turn around and life satisfaction peaks again at age 69. Why age 69? Because many people find that they have the highest average of those three resources. I have a significant portion of my health. I have money. Remember I said when you were 23, you had all the time and no money? In your 40s and 50s, you probably got money, you got no time. At age 69, you've got the time, the money, and the health to be able to direct those resources towards the things you think are most important in life, which leads to the height of life satisfaction. More good news, folks. Happiness with your body peaks at age 74. I guess at that point, we figure we got to play with the hand we were dealt, right? It ain't going to change. We've been trying to change it for years. And again, more good news. Psychological well-being, meaning individually, your ability to say, tomorrow will be better than today, continues to increase into your early 80s, at which point you may experience your first kind of major health event, which may begin to track from that. So folks, what's the impact here on preparing for retirement? Well, the old question used to be, how much will retirement cost? It's not that it's incorrect, it's just that it's incomplete. Now what our role is really to help plan participants think about, what will I be doing in retirement? What does my plan look like? I often say, imagine we were putting together a jigsaw puzzle. If we were, what's the most important first step? And plan participants always say, well, it's find the corners, find the straight edges. important steps, not the most important first step, which is you have to look at the picture on the box, right? Then once we have an idea what the picture is, we can start to assemble the pieces that we've collected, our 401k plan, IRAs from old employers, outside savings, and the like, to make that picture begin to come forth. It's something, by the way, that technology can't always help us with, this idea of clarifying the picture on my box. Technology works really well when you know exactly what you want to do. You want to pay a check, pay a bill online? By all means, it's secure, it's fast, it's easy, and you get it done in no time. But when there are a lot of questions about what concerns me, what worries me, what options do I have, where do I go, do I want to work, do I not want to work, where do I want to live, all these things, very difficult for technology to replace an empathetic conversation face to face with another human being, which is where financial advisors are so important to the equation. So folks, we talked about 8,000 days and those 4 8,000-day segments and the importance of that last 8,000-day segment because it's comprised of those 4 phases of retirement. We just touched on preparing for that 8,000 days and thinking about what the picture on our box looks like. I will share with you, and we can follow up, Julie and I, to make sure, along with the presentation, if you're interested in the slides, we can provide them. There's also a white paper that's written by the researchers at MIT. It's kind of a summary of what I shared with you today. And lastly, I'll end with a quote from Joe Coughlin at MIT, who says, these 4 phases enable a clear vision to kind of plan and anticipate what's likely to come. And here's the key. Effective preparation reduces the stress of uncertainty and boosts prolonged independence, which is really what we're all after in those stages of life for as long as we possibly can. Joe, I'll just end with a quote from my favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra, who famously said, the future ain't what it used to be. We wholeheartedly agree. It's what continues to drive our research with MIT, and it's my hope in a future session we can come back and share a little bit more about what we're learning. So, Joe, I'll turn it back to you in case there's any questions or comments that I could help with, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you very much, John. And as a Yankee fan, I greatly appreciate that quote by Yogi Berra and the tremendous presentation that you've shared with us today. And I also must share that if, for our attendees, if you ever have an opportunity to hear Dr. Coughlin speak as a keynote, take advantage of it. I have had an opportunity where he was a keynote speaker at a conference, and just a very dynamic speaker, and he draws you in. He has a great way to present. So I encourage everybody, if you do have that opportunity, to take advantage of it. We do have a couple of questions, John, so I'll share those with you and our group here. So obviously the pandemic has changed a lot about our workplace, you know, and talking about working remotely and obviously the gig economy. Do you see in the research and how employees now view retirement in terms of their participation in retirement programs, and also to what level they're saving in retirement programs? Do you see any effect with that change in the fact that we don't necessarily go into an office as much as maybe what we used to?
Not really, because again, well, I will say you do see a change in that if now the options are open for me to work longer because I actually like what I do, I think the retirement plan option makes even more sense for me, right? If I had originally intended to retire at age 61 or 62, but now I'm able to continue working, even with part of it being remote, I may be in a stage in life where I can really begin to sock away even more than I could at earlier points in my life. So I think at some point as we age and look at that, you know, savings opportunity going forward, it may actually hold more value to the aging worker than it did with someone, let's say, in our 30s or early 40s, when we're just trying to put food on the table and, you know, move to the next stage. So I think it provides a number of alternatives that I might not have thought of before. And that's where, you know, the beginning of the pandemic, Joe, we saw older workers were the ones that were most quickly moving out of employment because they were nearing retirement. They said, what the heck, why would we stick it out? And essentially, we accelerated the retirement of thousands and thousands of workers. Well, we've begun to see some of those workers starting to come back. And, part of the reason is that having freshly retired in the face of a market like we had last year and inflation at 8%, not exactly comfortable. So, all of these factors, I think, add to making the retirement plan a really attractive feature to the older worker.
Great. We do have one other question, and that's talking about part of practice management. And how do you see advisors incorporating, this research in their practice when they're consulting with plan participants, employers, and also kind of future casting what retirement would look like?
Sure. So one of the ways we've actually been engaged to come and do participant meetings, and one of the beauties of what we've done or learned over the past couple of years with remote presentations is that now we can reach more plan participants in multiple locations by presenting virtually. And what I find, Joe, is a topic like this. Look, we're always going to have to do the how to enroll and the basic investment education and things like that, but sometimes what we find is that a topic like this is somewhat refreshing for plan participants because it kind of broadens the scope of why I'm saving, and it gets me to question kind of where I am in my stage of life and what roles that I play in my family. And I think it brings more meaning to the retirement plan overall than just the technical parts of how it works, how I enroll, how I, increase contributions. All those things are important. But I think if we can set the right environment, we can increase motivation to maybe review how much I'm saving, but more importantly, attach it to why I'm saving, which hopefully will lead to increased participation and maybe more stick-to-itness in terms of our retirement planning.
Great, thank you. Well, we'd like
Sure.
to thank John, Julia, and our partners at Hartford Funds for a great session today. As a reminder, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation along with a recording of the session as a follow-up. We wish you safety and health as you support your families, colleagues, and clients. Please don't hesitate to contact us if there's anything that EPIC Retirement Plan Services or Hartford Funds can do to help support you and your efforts. And we thank you and look forward to having you join us for our February edition of EPIC Insight.